Los Angeles is looking for healing in the wake of these shocking racist remarks made by 3 members of the Los Angeles City Council, 3 Latino members of the Los Angeles City Council. I'm shocked. Who could have known that Latinos also could be racist? So it's a time for healing, and I want to bring Los Angeles together, whether you're a part of Los Angeles, the actual city, or you're just a spiritual Los Angelino.
Ted was white.
This question goes for the both of you. The next mayor of Los Angeles will be either an African-American woman or a white man.
I'm Italian.
Italian-American.
Thank you. That's Latin. Thank you.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Bream, and I want a yes or no.
Okay.
Are Italians white?
There is a big internet argument over this.
That is not a yes or no.
There are people, but first, here's the thing too, so I go down a rabbit hole because there's this big fight over whether Italians are Latin and the difference between Latin and Latino, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much nuance here that I'm going to get myself in trouble no matter what I say. But the way that she framed the question, I don't think was fair, because she's like,
that's a setup.
Minority woman or a white guy? And you hate white guys, so you can't vote for him.
That was not a fair and balanced moderator right there.
No, I agree.
Okay, first up, there are a lot of places to find love. The gym,
Okay, let's check in with Tucker Carlson here, and then we'll get on to what's going on in Los Angeles. Let's see if Tucker is bringing anything good.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. John Fetterman is a trust fund kid. He took money from his parents deep into middle age when he decided finally what he would like to do with the rest of his life, which is to be the U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. The problem is fate intervened and he can now no longer speak. He had a bad stroke and we feel bad about that. Everyone does. But because of that stroke, Fetterman now needs electronic assistance in order to communicate with other people. He can't talk on his own. It's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real. In fact, it's so real, his campaign concedes that it's real, that it's true. Fetterman uses a software program to understand the words of those around him and to formulate his responses to those words. In other words, to talk. Now, to be perfectly clear, this software is not a hearing aid. Fetterman doesn't need a hearing aid because he isn't deaf. He's not hearing impaired. Instead, this program takes words and then rearranges them into language that John Fetterman can understand because his brain can no longer do that for him. Now, that's sad. For transhumanists, though, it is thrilling. This is an amazing moment. This is Neil Armstrong on the moon. Here you have one of the most famous politicians in the country merging with a computer. This is the future they imagine. They're thrilled by it. But for everyone else, for the voters of Pennsylvania, for example, it does raise some obvious questions. For example, where exactly does the software end and John Fetterman's consciousness begin? We don't know. We can't know. But it's obvious that Pennsylvania could very well be sending a computer program to the U.S. Senate, where inevitably it will be hacked. Yesterday, MSNBC sat down with John Fetterman and his thinking machine to assess where the man ends and the machine begins. And the initial impressions were not at all encouraging.
We had a monitor set up so that he could read my questions because he still has lingering auditory processing issues as a result of the stroke, which means he has a hard time understanding what he's hearing. Now, once he reads the question, he's able to understand. You'll hear he also still has some problems, some challenges with speech. And I'll say, Katie, that just in some of the small talk prior to the interview, before the closed captioning was up and running, it did seem that he had a hard time understanding our conversations.
Well, good for her for admitting that. That's a rival channel. Don't watch a lot of MSNBC, but she should tell viewers that, and she did. And what she just told you is that before the machine was turned on, John Fetterman could not understand human language, not even small talk. But once the machine was plugged in, he sounded, or the machine sounded, nearly human. But don't worry. Everything's going to be fine in the Senate as long as there's not a power outage. It's not like the electricity ever goes down in this country. We definitely have enough renewables to keep John Fetterman voting the right way for the next 6 years. Better build some more wind farms. That's the plan. But once again, to the credit of the MSNBC reporter, she did ask a follow-up. How do we know your thinking machine isn't going to break, John Fetterman? Can we see a doctor's report on this? Here's how that exchange went.
Can voters trust that you will be able to do this job on day one?
Yeah, of course.
So you say you're on the road to full recovery, but right now, voters really have to take your word for it. We've asked for your medical records. We've asked to have a conversation with someone from your medical team, to interview your physician. You've declined those requests. Why?
Well, I feel like we have been very transparent in a lot of different ways. When our doctor has already given a letter saying that I'm able to serve and to be running.
I mean, respectfully, that letter from your physician, that was 6 months ago. Don't voters deserve to know your status now?
Being in front of thousands and thousands of people and having interviews and getting around all across Pennsylvania, that gives everybody and the voters decide, if they think that it's really the issue.
So he's reading that off a screen. And by the way, we're taking him at his word that there's not a staffer backstage typing out the answers because he himself can't formulate them. Now, again, you can feel deeply sympathetic to John Fetterman. That's sad to watch. But this is a guy who wants to run the federal government in a body of 100, the most powerful legislative body in the world. And he wants to be a member of it. So over at CBS, reporter Ed O'Keefe asked the obvious question, quote, will Pennsylvanians be comfortable with someone representing them who had to conduct a TV interview this way? Now, that's a mild way to put it, but it's certainly a fair observation. The guy's reading his answers off a screen with the reporter 3 feet away. That's the definition of impairment. And again, this is a very serious job. But others in the media scoffed at the idea that was a problem at all. In fact, far from being a problem, it was an asset. Because if the equity agenda means anything, it means that incompetent people ought to be in charge. That's equity. As New York City Councilwoman Rita Joseph put it, questions about Fetterman's profound brain damage are, quote, incredibly ableist. Ableist. We desperately need more diversity in elected office, and that includes people with speech impediments. Well, we desperately need that. That is absolutely right. But actually, we're not talking about a speech impediment. She's telling us he's got a stutter, just like Joe Biden. Remember when they told you that Joe Biden's dementia was just a stutter? But of course, a speech impediment would not prevent Fetterman or Biden from understanding other people's speech. Investigative reporter Hunter Walker, who writes for Rolling Stone and The New Yorker, answered that question with a question of his own. Quote, would they treat a deaf person like this for needing assistance? Oh, so if you have questions about John Fetterman, you hate the deaf. You're a hearingist, bigot. We're going to close down your bank account at JP Morgan, ableist. But again, it's not really relevant to the Senate race in Pennsylvania because, once again, John Fetterman doesn't have hearing problems. He's not deaf. This isn't deafness. This is brain damage. So the Independent's Eric Michael Garcia tried to tie up that loose end, and he used an analogy to do it. That's how really smart people talk. How is this any different, he wrote, from Tammy Duckworth or Madison Cawthorn needing a wheelchair? Oh, so John Fetterman being unable to talk without reading it off a screen, either from the software or from one of his staffers backstage, is exactly the same as being wounded in defense of your own country. It's a war injury. And then John Fetterman's wife, who came into this country as an illegal alien, by the way, wondered the same thing. And we're quoting, truly appalling. Have these journalists never heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act? Really curious to learn how they feel about wheelchairs and glasses. End quote. Really? So your questions about John Fetterman's mental health, the acuity of his brain, his ability to talk and listen and reason, use his higher faculties, those questions are banned by the Americans with Disabilities Act because he's not just an incompetent guy trying to take over the country. No, he's disabled. Over at Vox, Ian Millhiser said he knows exactly how Fetterman's bigoted critics view people with eyeglasses. It's like the Khmer Rouge. Quote, is it the position of NBC News that a senator with glasses cannot be trusted in office because they use assistive technology to accommodate their disability? It's so unbelievable. Not only can you not ask questions about the guy you're supposed to vote for and whether he can actually represent you in the United States Senate, you're not allowed. He's fine, and by the way, the fact he's not fine is the reason to vote for him. So they're hitting you from both sides. Vote for him because he's so profoundly disabled, and we don't have enough of those in the Senate. But if you know that he's profoundly disabled, you're a bigot. Woo! They got you coming and going. Have you heard this before? Does it sound kind of familiar? Where they take someone with an obvious impairment and then they use him to accrue more power for themselves. It's not really about the disabled person, it's about them. And then if you ask questions about it, shut up, bigot! Does the term Greta Thunberg come to mind? That's the girl who's always lecturing you about global warming and how you're evil. Greta Thunberg is someone who needed help and concern from adults. At the age of 11, she lost 22 pounds because, according to her parents, she was so depressed about global warming that she couldn't eat. And then she was diagnosed with a whole suite of very serious problems: OCD, mutism, Asperger's. Very, very sad, actually. But the people around Greta Thunberg and the people who used Greta Thunberg didn't see this as sad at all. They saw it as an advantage for them, because Greta Thunberg could be used to...
Okay, Dooovid, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
Hey, Baruch Hashem. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. How are your first 2 days of Sukkot?
Baruch Hashem. You know, I didn't muster up the courage to go to shul, but I got I did all the prayers. I didn't actually build a sukkah. I got my lulav and esrog. I haven't spent $100. Got a good one. God forbid, kind of slacking on my Judaism. I'm not exactly sure. I just couldn't muster the courage to go to shul. I hadn't seen people for years, and couldn't bring myself to do it. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird from the outside, but I'm sure it makes perfect sense from the inside, because we all fall into habits. For example, you can get a cold, and you can just fall into the habit of speaking in that certain nasally way, that blocked up, stuffed up way that people get when they have a cold. So anything very quickly spirals in a positive sense. If you, for example, take up a positive exercise routine or a positive diet, or you start acting on New Year's resolutions or whatever. But isolation is its own spiral. And so once you kind of dropped out of the community, every day that you don't go back, it makes it that much harder to go back. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I wasn't really part of the community. Synagogue. It was part of my worship, my Jewish experience, that I went to synagogue. Like, I know the people there. I mean, to some extent, we're part of the community. We live in the same neighborhood, but I basically only saw them in synagogue, and had friendly, cordial relations with a bunch of people, but the relationship didn't extend outside of the synagogue. And so COVID-19, I stopped going to synagogue, and so I wasn't really part of the community at all. So now, like 2 years, I haven't been to shul, and I get stage fright, social anxiety. Like, oh my God, I'm going to go to shul. I'm going to, see all these people. And plus, the only shul near me is a membership synagogue where I'm not a paying member. And, there's all politics, and I just gave myself a whole bunch of reasons. It's kind of, maybe I'm also going through, I don't call it a midlife crisis, identity crisis, reassessing my life, what I'm trying to do with my life for the role of Orthodox Judaism.
Yeah. So have you come to any clarity in all this introspection?
No, more confusion. I think I'm really too old to do something else. I'm pretty addicted to Judaism, and then so it's kind of weird. Like, I'm very Jewish. Judaism means it's probably the single most important thing in my life, but Judaism is a communal religion. I was talking with Charles about that. E. Michael Jones had, I think, said about Charles Moskowitz to this guy Rizzoli that there is no Protestant approach to Judaism, and we've talked about that. So, I've been doing a Protestant approach to Judaism, and I'll probably continue doing that to the rest of my life. But the reality is, Judaism, uh, you can't legitimate a Protestant approach. It's a communal religion, and you're either part of the community or not.
So talk to me more. What's a Protestant approach to Judaism?
Personal relationship with God. Yeah, like Breslov and Hisbodedus, and you're trying to talk to God in your own words. But Judaism is not about your private relationship with God, although there's definitely aspects in Hasidus and Jewish philosophy and theology about having a very good personal relationship with God. But it's a communal religion, and there's requirements like the minyan, the prayer service, that require part of the community, the literature. Like we all don't stand alone on Judgment Day; we stand together on Judgment Day. Various issues like Israel, Zionism, fighting anti-Semitism. Like Iran, what's good for the Jews, and I think all the efforts to maybe you would be able to word it better than me, but it's very, you can't really be an individual Jew because like it's a communal religion, and so even if it's like you meet non-Jews and like, oh, you're Jewish, occasionally people ask you questions about Jewish theology, but they're more likely to ask you about your relationship to the Jewish community or other Jews. And because I've been a Jew most of my life in communal affairs, I still know a lot of people. I'm still connected on social media. Maybe it's also being an old bachelor that as my age increases, like over 40, a lot of even the single stuff kind of gives up on you, and people are already at the age where they're marrying their kids off, have grandkids, and I mean, you've talked about it before. You still are part of the community, but in many ways, the Judaism is built upon the family unit structure and the education of the kids, and family events, simchas, weddings, bar mitzvahs, circumcisions, kiddushes, and it's kind of like, okay, it passed me by. It didn't work out for whatever reason, and so I'm just trying to reassess. I don't, maybe call it a midlife crisis.
Right, and Judaism is definitely a communal religion, but there have been, many individuals in Judaism who have preferred to isolate themselves. There have been Hasidic rabbis who've chosen to largely isolate themselves. Rabbi Nachman, all right, he preferred to isolate himself for many, many years. There are rabbis in the Talmud who chose to isolate themselves. There were prophets in the Bible who chose to isolate themselves. So it's not like isolating yourself is without any precedent in the Jewish tradition.
Yeah, it's inclusive on different levels. So and then I won a big chess tournament this week on the internet. I play for Israel. I still have a lot of social media connections. I'm in the engineering or possibly Detroit larger business social circles that I have a role to the community. But to some extent it's it's, I mean, maybe you as a convert, I think just being an old bachelor in and of itself, because even the difference between me and you, that I'm not a convert, I'm just a Baal Tshuva, but I don't have really any familial relationships in the local synagogues. So at a certain point, I'm just an isolated Jew, and the Jewish community is still relatively welcoming. I assume if I walked into any synagogue or event, that the majority of the people would be relatively accepting, and it's known that you should be nice and encouraging to people. But so it might just be more personal, just thinking that I'm getting old. I got to accomplish something with my life, and what I'm doing isn't really going anywhere. And my role in the Jewish community isn't really going anywhere. Maybe certain failures, like with the liberal synagogue downtown, that they went a different direction, and even like Chabad or the various things like it's just I wouldn't say I'm depressed, like we said last time we spoke, that I have a pretty baseline level of kind of like minor towards depressive, so I don't feel like I'm more depressed than normal. I just it was kind of weird. I couldn't bring myself to go to synagogue.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. I think people can tell how honest you're being. There's no artifice, there's no pretense here, there's no play acting, there's no performance. You're talking about things that you're struggling with, and it's so real that it comes across and is compelling to the viewer, because everybody has things that they struggle over. Many people are struggling over their identity. Many people are struggling coming out of COVID and how much they want to integrate a more social life. Once again, many people are questioning their commitments, questioning the direction of their life, or what gives their life meaning. I think we're all looking for a place to shine. We're all looking for a place to contribute. We want a home, not just online, but in the real world. And so I think you're speaking to these universal issues. Now, I got into an interesting conversation over the holidays about the decline of organized religion in America in particular. And so several Jews I was talking to were sad about the decline of organized religion, but one of them made the point that many Orthodox Jews are more religious than ever, and that's true. There's more Torah study going on now, more intensely, with more people than ever before in Jewish history. But what I notice, even if there are many areas where Orthodox Jews are more observant than ever before, they are still living in a world that is steadily reducing the amount of magic and enchantment and mystery and sense of the transcendent. So we still live in a highly rationalized world, a highly economical world, where people move around for jobs, where more and more of what happens in life is thought to be explained by science rather than theology or philosophy or mysticism, right? So my friend Ricardo's in the chat, and he understands much of the world through the concept of demons, which is a traditional way of understanding the world, that there are demons out there, there are angels out there, there are forces of good and evil, that there are sacred spaces and sacred forces and demonic forces, and they're doing battle. And so Ricardo has a more medieval view than I do, because I don't believe in demons, but I have a far more medieval view than your regular secularist, because I do believe in forces of good and evil. I do believe in God. I do believe in the transcendent. I do believe in the magical and sacred spaces. And as science becomes more and more the thing that's put on a pedestal and is used to explain what's happening, that's even affecting religious people. So if there was an earthquake that rolled through while I'm carrying on a conversation with Orthodox Jews, they would not turn to God as the primary explanation. They would say, look, there are tectonic plates, and this plate is rubbing up against this plate, and that's why we had an earthquake. So more of life is being explained through ostensibly scientific reasons, and less of life is being explained by reference to God. So even though many Orthodox Jews may be even increasing their level of observance, they're still living in a steadily less enchanted, less transcendent, less religious, less God-centered world. And the people I was talking to understood my point, and they agreed with me. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and I think I watched your Cato Gottfried interview, and I thought you really peak talking points there. And you're mentioning that there is still activity in church or the levels of the orthodoxy, and the certain level of the community where you're raising families together. And the Jewish community puts a substantial amount of emphasis, maybe even greater than half of the Jewish community's emphasis is on educating the next generation, keeping kids on the derrick and the path, and like all the holidays, things are geared towards kids in the community. Even the liberal synagogue, they basically went with the handful of young parents and tried to create little community about just of the handful of Jews in Detroit with kids. And so now it's like every other week is like a Tat Shabbos and events geared towards bringing young couples with their children together. And I think Cato's point on the church is most churches lack that, although there are definitely a lot of churches that do have that strong family unit. And then, it's probably my own personal failure, struggle with identity, that if I was in the Orthodox community and the problem I see, like the main things, anti-Semitism, BDS, um, various issues where the Jewish community doesn't really train the children for the struggles that are present today in the university level. Like my father always, mentioned the decline of Jewish medical school students, where the percentage of Jews in medical schools keeps on decreasing. The academic achievement level of Jews has been decreasing for multiple factors. And although the modern Orthodox community, there's always very competitive people, or still relatively doing quite well. There's constantly people graduating from medical schools, or going to Harvard. Uh, there's issues facing the community that the community is having a very difficult time preparing their children to. If it's off the derrick, if it's the Orthodox people, and the questions like we were talking about with the Haredi and education, how much secular education to give, and then the liberalization of America, where are we full gung ho multiculturalism and leftism, or trying to have some sort of conservative values, and then how do you have that where you're where we live largely in African American, multicultural, the center of the bluest parts of America. So it's a big challenge. And if I was a father in the community, it'd probably be a huge challenge. Um, like I wasn't competitive enough. Like I would have had to been really rich and a super dad that my kids now would be like going to good universities, trying to get them into medical schools. I'd have to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars, to pay for their tuition, and I'd be struggling. I probably would have had to be a very strong Zionist and fighting anti-Semitism and the modern Orthodox party line, and it would have been extremely difficult to have met those challenges that you imagine if you were a father right now and you were able to toe the modern Orthodox party line, and you would be forced to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to pay for your kids' education, and then trying to deal with your kids and the culture wars that are currently brewing.
Yeah. So I was just listening to Tucker Carlson's monologue about John Fetterman, the Democrat running for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania, how he had a stroke about 6 months ago. He's still severely disabled. Is it okay to discriminate against the disabled, or at least to take that into consideration when casting your vote? And then it made me think about the Torah, because priests with defects explicitly are not allowed to serve in the holy temple, according to the Torah. So we're talking Leviticus chapter 21. Nobody who has a physical blemish can draw near to the holy place in the temple to offer bread in the presence of God. No one who is blind, no one who is lame, no one who has a mutilated face or a limb that's too long, no one who's a hunchback or a dwarf or a man with a defect in his sight or an itching disease or scabs or crushed testicles can draw close to God in the temple. And so the point is, you're not allowed to also offer animals for sacrifice that are blind or disabled or mutilated or have a discharge or an itch, because we have this human tendency to offer to God what we really don't want anyway. So we would rather take those who are disabled or unpleasant to look at and perhaps hide them away. And now here we've got the Torah saying priests who are disabled or unpleasant to look at, right, the defective one, right, maybe they shouldn't be leading the religious services in the holy temple. So any thoughts on this piece of Torah and how it might apply to wider society?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's apt comparison, because to compare temple service to politics, where it's something like for God and has to be done perfect, as opposed to politics, which is not holy. And I'm not sure if there's a parallel to like being a judge or administering public needs in these ritualistic demands, because the concept of ritualistic purity or ritualistic perfection, just like my lulav and esrog. I had to spend $100 for a palm and a citron, and want perfection that doesn't have any blemishes. That's for a ritual, and there's a certain belief pattern. So I'm not sure if you could draw that parallel to politics, and if you think the Talmudic requirements for a judge, I don't think it includes those things.
Correct. But it doesn't bother me that the Torah includes these discriminatory laws against who cannot serve in the temple. So obviously, someone who's not born a Kohen can't convert to being a Kohen, right? So a Kohen refers to the priest who served in the ancient temple. So there's a hereditary element in Judaism that you can't, overcome with money. And there are all sorts of qualifications and disqualifications for service in the Jewish temple and other aspects of Jewish law. So here are some of the physical disqualifications to serve as a Kohen, as a priest in the temple: blindness, lameness, disproportionate limbs, a crippled foot or hand, cataracts, blindness, certain types of boils, and crushed testicles. So a Kohen with any of these imperfections is deemed unfit for service. However, if it is a correctable imperfection, he can become re-eligible for service once the defect is corrected. Although he is unable to serve publicly, he is permitted to eat of the holy food. And Kohanim, Jewish priests with these blemishes, are allowed to perform work in the temple outside of the sacrificial service itself. So there are other forms of defilement that would prohibit a priest from serving in the temple, such as contact with the dead, exposure to that which is unclean. A Jewish priest may not marry a divorcee, a prostitute, or a convert. All right. Certainly cannot marry a woman who has committed adultery, has been involved in incest, or has had relations with a non-Jew, or is the child of two converts. So a born Jewish woman who has had premarital relations may marry a Kohen only if all of her partners were Jewish. So any thoughts on all these restrictions, Dooovid?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's at least in the comparison, like a category error, if this is unique to man and God as opposed to man and fellow man. And the reason behind this doesn't have to do with perception or man and fellow man, but saying like these are rituals, it has to do with God, and it has to be done perfect to work. And for something political or man between man, it wouldn't be significance. I mean, the point isn't that the Kohen has a blemish, and therefore the perception, or it's just that it's not going to work because it's for God and it has to be perfect, or the ritual won't work. So I mean, it is interesting, these notes, and I think generally Judaism has some levels of being very discriminatory, and then other levels of anti-discriminatory, and certainly the temple ritual and the various things are discriminatory, but it's ritualistic in that manner. That the point is that they're going to do a ritual, and the ritual needs to work, and then the Kohanim, generally that's secluded. It's just the Kohanim in the temple. The Israelites don't actually see what happens, and then you see the other Kohanim get the benefit. They still get the taxes. They still get to eat from the sacrifice. They just can't perform the duty of the sacrifice. So I think you have elements of the nobody gets left behind part of Judaism that a lot of non-Jews find beautiful, with this level of elitism or superiority. But as I said, like, is it a category area to compare that to some practical form of governments or politics when this is specific to rituals?
Well, I think the point is that if you are comfortable with Judaism, you're comfortable with many forms of discrimination. Obviously, there are certain forms of discrimination that you'll find appalling, but the whole basis of Judaism is discriminating between Jew and non-Jew, between holy and secular time, between that which is permitted and that which is forbidden, between the Sabbath and the other days of the week. So
you clearly define boundaries.
Mhm.
Just like you're a convert, you're not a Kohen. This is not you. You'll never be able to do this. It's a clear boundary that you're never going to cross for the rest of your life. Just accept it.
Right.
And
So
the secularism, which is like no, you can't have boundaries like that.
So it doesn't bother me if other people use various forms of discrimination. Now, I'm sure there are forms of discrimination that bother me, but if someone decides not to elect somebody to the U.S. Senate because they can't speak and think clearly as a result of having a stroke, I don't think we have to worry about that kind of vote being discrimination against the crippled. Obviously, the National Football League is not going to employ players who are crippled, and the California State Bar is the most difficult state bar in the United States of America. Obviously, you have to be very high IQ and very diligent to pass the California State Bar and become a lawyer in California. So that's going to be discriminatory against people who aren't disciplined and aren't smart. So this basic fact of life, that life is frequently discriminating. I think someone with a traditional outlook, including a traditional Jewish outlook, is going to be much more at ease with that than the secular liberal who believes that people are basically good and who has an allergic reaction to the word discrimination.
Yeah, and we could relate to what we're talking about, the difficulties of parenting and, as single Orthodox Jews that don't have to worry about the struggles that most Orthodox parents would be going through, and would our children be ill prepared for the world, and what approach would we take? So I mean, the U.S. is kind of completely deteriorated into clown world. The origins are, we could debate or talk at length of the origins of it, but the Biden presidency, Trump, race realism, various things that the truth has slipped away. We've had these narratives that have been pushed and accepted that are clearly not true, and it's like you're not allowed to say the truth, and so that we've reached this situation where these kind of blatant things that everybody knows are unspeakable is, God forbid, it's we're in America, and to see our own demise and bad predicament is very troubling. But maybe laughter, people try to make light of it. But yeah, I mean, it's very troubling to see that this is the current situation we're in American politics, where just clown world, or however you describe it, where the truth has been lost, and certain things that are just obvious to everybody can't be said because we've been pushing these narratives that are clearly not true for a whole bunch of reasons.
So Kanye West was at a fashion show wearing White Lives Matter shirts along with Candace Owens, and then he later tweeted that he was going DEFCON 3 against the Jews. So DEFCON is a defensive position; it's not an offensive position. But anyway, Kanye West ended up getting banned from various forms of social media, such as Instagram and Twitter, because of his outbursts. And he says, I can't be anti-Semitic because black people are actually Jewish. You guys have toyed with me and tried to blackball anyone who opposes your agenda. So Kanye West is kind of off the reservation. Did you pay any attention to Kanye West?
Yeah, I've been following the story. I think I was in Stony Brook University when Kanye West first had songs coming out, and some were all right. I never found him that compelling, or that he was a Republican. I thought your points on Cotto Gottfried, where you're kind of arguing about abortion and the concept of African American abortions, or why Republicans use certain talking points. Is it because they're racist, or they're less racist than the left? That there's certain dynamics, and if you're talking about the LA politics, the elections coming up, elections are about winning. And so when it comes to elections, there's the general conservatism, how I want to live my life, who I want to associate with. Like if you're an Orthodox Jew, you say, well, I just want lower taxes and I want to be able to be around my community in America to be set up in a way that allows me and my community to get ahead and have a safe society. But then elections come, you got to win, and you win by building coalitions, and coalitions are very weakly held together, mostly by lies, propaganda, and false promises. So, now with the elections coming up, Kanye West is important to the right wing coalition in certain ways. Um, so these statements, and to the left, the somewhat hypocrisy of anti-Semitism on the left, where God forbid, a lot of anti-Semitism on the left is swept under the rug and highlighted from like white nationalists. So it's really the clown world and the web of lies and election propaganda that just comes to the forefront. Although it's also the level of possibly increased anti-Semitism and the predicament that Jews in America might be facing moving forward. That it's just the statement of one man, but he's one of the most influential people in America. He's got hundreds of millions of followers, and as a Republican, we're bound to make a statement. Kanye West, what is he? Does he feel about the Jews? Should we be defending his free speech? Should we be saying he's not anti-Semitic, or are we gonna draw the line or the level of mentally ill? Like Nicholas Fuentes isn't mentally ill. Richard Spencer, usually it's not. Richard Spencer is not mentally ill. He's like this horrible anti-Semite that deserves to be punished. Is where Kanye West, though, he's just mentally ill, like the John McWhorter has been, the New York Times or the Glenn Show talking about that, where the excuse for blacks, like, just like mental illness is, another dog whistle of racism.
Yeah. Okay, Dooovid, I'm going to move on. Thanks for coming by the show.
God forbid, I have to admit, one of the first movies, I was probably 10 years old in the mid 80s, saw was Kitten, Natividad, and I saw she died at 73, and think that it was that old, and I saw her. I don't know if you were at the funeral or the eulogy, or if you fell out, and I saw on a few internet databases you're listed as one of her former boyfriends. I saw in your biography you mentioned that story with the AOL, but I don't know if you wanted to mention that, if you want to skip that. Just you'll sign off. I will admit that I think she's the first adult person. Like I stayed up late after my parents went to sleep, and like I don't know if it was HBO or some station, and I was probably 10 years old. She's the first one I saw. So I read that in your book. It was like I know that name from somewhere, and God forbid, passed away.
Yeah, I went to interview her at something like February 1997, and we went to dinner. She was quite outgoing, and she couldn't figure out how to install AOL on her computer. So she was fun. She was easy to talk to. She was
already in her mid 40s then. Like when you said in your book, like you also like that movie, Training Day or something, the 80s movie that she was in, one of the most popular.
Yeah. My Tutor. She was in My Tutor, which was like a seminal movie when I was in my teens.
But she was already in her mid 40s when you met her.
Yeah, I think she was close to 50, and she was diagnosed with cancer, and she had her breasts removed, a double mastectomy, a couple of years after I met her. But,
so that's just the story in your book. You weren't following her funeral, or you haven't followed any contact, and is that accurate? Did you know that you're listed as one of her former boyfriends on
I just looked it up when you mentioned it. So we just had the one evening together, and that was it. But she was very friendly, very outgoing. She was an easy person to talk to, and like very, very generous, very hospitable, and it's one of those rare occasions where I went to interview someone and ended up hooking up with her. That doesn't happen that often, but she was, far more sexually experienced than I was. She wanted to go to all sorts of places that I didn't want to go to. I was like very much the virgin. She was very much the Chad. Like she was, much more experienced in this realm. Like she would have eaten me for dinner. I was, a little bit grateful to get out of there alive.
I saw the thing from your blog. Like, God forbid, it looked like it was on your own blog. It said that you were like a virgin, and like the granny. And I guess that was Stephen Saylor who wrote that. It didn't make any sense.
It was just a satirical. It was someone's satirical perspective on my evening with Kitten Natividad.
And then the Dennis Prager didn't like congratulate you on that.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, okay. I was confused, and
it was
I
satire.
saw that.
Yeah,
I looked that up, and I saw you also quoted on like some of these sites for her bio that like you're one of the sources for some of her biographical information. But yeah, I mean, God forbid, God bless her, and tough to know. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, and how time flies. 73 years old.
Yeah, I remember she didn't really want to give me much of an interview. She just wanted to chat, and she'd just like give me previous interviews that she'd done. She'd said, "Hey, quote from these." She didn't want to go through the ardor or the labor of being interviewed. So we just sat around and talked for a couple of hours. Okay, Dooovid, good to chat with you, man. Take care.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
Hugs away. Bye-bye. Okay, here's what's going on in Los
Politics
Angeles.
lead. The president of the Los Angeles City Council has resigned that position, the presidency, following the release of a secretly recorded conversation during which she used a vile racist slur to refer to the child of a fellow council member. This happened in a conversation.
Okay, so this racist slur was monkey. I mean, I was called a monkey countless times growing up. Do I look like I was traumatized because people called me a monkey? This idea that people are traumatized and weeping, and that LA is convulsed by this leaked recording of a private conversation just is absurd. Like, if any of us had our private conversations made public, they would be uncouth, all right? None of us are perfectly gentlemanly in all of our private conversations. That's why there is an arena of the private. So this has made such a big deal, and it's being directed with these top-down terms of like racist, bigoted, sexist, homophobic. Again, just shows you how empty these concepts are. There's no reality such as racism. And that this Latino councilwoman called a black child a monkey is not in and of itself racist, if there even was such a thing as racism, because I'm white child, right? 99% pure Bavarian phenotype, right? I was called a monkey all the time. My stepmother called me a monkey. A monkey is a very common description of energetic young kids. And to be in uproar over this just shows how empty people's lives are. I mean, if we were dealing with killer COVID, such as the type of COVID we had in 2020 and 2021, I don't think we would be as aroused by what's going on here with these LA City Council
members. About redistricting and the possible impact on communities of color. CNN's Nick Watt reports on the growing fallout from these remarks as calls intensify for her to step down from the council altogether.
Communities of color. I mean, this woman is pretty white. Many Latinos look as white as anyone else, and yet they are lumped in with communities of color. I mean, how stupid is this?
Mike Bonin is an LA City Council member and father to a young black son. Last year, they went to an MLK Day parade.
Right, so you're a gay dude, you marry another man, and you adopt a little black child, all right? What did you expect people to react to that? That you just thought they'd just only celebrate that, right? He is deliberately, challenging traditional mores, and he expected that no one would ever remark on it.
City Council President Nuri Martinez had some issues.
It's like black and brown on this float, and then there's this white guy with this little black kid who's misbehaved. The kid is bouncing off the effing walls on the float, practically tipping it over. There's nothing you can do to control him. Parece changuito.
Translation, little monkey.
They're raising him like a little white kid, which I was like, This kid needs a beat down. Like,
Yeah, so when she says raising like a white kid, she means he's not getting beaten down. So she understands that probably white parents now are more reluctant to beat down their kids than the children of other races. And this is supposed to be a big deal. This is supposed to be a trauma.
let me take him around the corner and then I'll bring him back.
Bonin tweeted that Martinez attacked our son with horrific racist slurs and talked about her desire.
That's ludicrous. I mean, which one of us has not said something like, I'd like to beat someone down, right? I want to kill someone. I want to murder someone. It doesn't mean literally. It's just one of those things that people toss off in private. Now, if someone's talking in private about how I'm gathering guns and I'm going to go to such and such an institution and start shooting people, right? That's a whole new level of specificity and new level of threat. But to say we were appalled, angry, and absolutely disgusted that Nuri Martinez attacked our son with horrific racist slurs and talked about her desire to physically harm him. It's vile, abhorrent, and utterly disgraceful. No, you are vile, you're abhorrent, you're utterly disgraceful to make such a big deal of this. If your child is being disruptive, how do you expect other people to react to you?
To physically harm him, it's vile, abhorrent, and utterly disgraceful. There were protests at her house. Today she resigned as council president. She issued this apology.
Hate in America? All right, this is the CNN subtitle, Hate in America. This audio is incredibly mild. This is nothing. You should hear what my friends say. No, I mean, to call this hate in America, where's the hate? Right, saying that someone's a little monkey is not hateful. Saying that a disruptive kid, you want to spank or beat that kid, that's not hateful. That's just a normal human reflex, right? It's just written into human DNA is we don't care much about outgroups, right? Now, you can make outgroup those people who are ignorant and bigoted and prejudiced, you can make them Republicans or conservatives, right? But we have a human need for outgroups to define ourselves against, right? We have a human need to put down other people and to think that our group is superior, whether our group is religious or racial or educational or professional, right? This is an inextricable part of being human. You can never erase it. Now, ideally, I try to conduct myself as though what I'm saying, what I'm doing, if it showed up on the front page of the New York Times, that it wouldn't be a disaster such as this. But to be human, right, is to share some nasty parts of you. The human being is filled with nastiness. This Enlightenment idea that people are just born basically good, and that if anyone does anything wrong, that there must be something wrong with society to have caused it, is ridiculous. Dennis Prager is right. The opposite is more true. We are born disgusting, and society tends to make us better.
In a moment of intense frustration and anger, I let the situation get the best of me, and I hold myself accountable for these comments. For that, I am sorry. Recorded nearly a year ago, the audio was posted anonymously on Reddit, first reported by the Los Angeles Times. Those present were, reports the paper, all Democrats, all Hispanic. Among them, Labor leader Ron Herrera. He's tweeted, "There is no justification and no excuse for the vile remarks made in that room, period. And I didn't step."
There are no vile remarks, right? They haven't shown me any example of vile remarks or racist, offensive. These are non-existent, magical, made-up moral categories.
Step up to stop them. He did not. And when
and how do you imagine life would be if you went around stopping people who are making vile, racist, offensive, prejudiced, bigoted remarks? You wouldn't have a very happy life. You wouldn't be getting along with other people very well. Nobody would want you around.
Martinez described Bonin's son as an accessory, according to the paper.
That's not a ludicrous designation, all right? Plenty of parents have kids who essentially function as accessories. It is weird having these two gay dudes getting married and then adopting a black child, right? They may be wonderful parents. I don't know, but it's unusual. When you choose to do things that are unusual, you should expect people to remark on it, right? I like to date younger women. I like to date women in their 20s and 30s. And so other people remark on that I like to date younger women because I'm doing something that's a little bit taboo. And if I didn't want to put up with those kind of remarks, then I'd have to stop dating younger women.
He joined in.
It's an accessory. When we do the MLK parade. Just like when
they used to have. Either the observation is correct or it's not. Now, either these two gay dudes are using this black kid as an accessory, or maybe they are good parents. But either it's true or it's not. The observation is not inherently evil.
Those statues and plantations. And then when Nori brings her Moyard bag or the Louis Vuitton bag,
That last voice, Council Member Kevin De Leon. He's got big ambitions. Ran for mayor this year and a US Senate seat in 18. I regret appearing to condone and even contribute to certain insensitive comments.
So do you essentially want political leaders who are robots, who aren't human, right? These are 4 Latino politicians gathering together in what they regarded as a safe space. The most normal thing when you have 4 members of an in-group gathering together is to say critical and nasty things about out-groups. That's just wired into us. It doesn't inherently lead to genocide.
Wrote, I fell short of the expectations we set for our leaders. Now, this audio tells us a couple of things. The first is the kind of language that some politicians are happy to use when they think nobody is listening. And also...
Oh, my God. So this reporter, what kind of language do you think he uses when nobody's listening? Everybody uses language that would shock and offend other people when in private.
So it tells us about the deep divisions amongst the left of center leaders here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so the left, the Democratic Party, are the coalition of the fringe. You've got a bunch of groups. You've got many Jews, gays, Latinos, trans, blacks, and the only thing that they have in common is a resentment against the white Christian majority. So the left-wing coalition of the fringe is inherently unstable. So the Republican Party, by and large, is the party of white Christians. And the Democratic Party, by and large, is the party of the coalition of the fringe. And the coalition of the fringe is highly unstable. By and large, Latinos do not much care for blacks. By and large, Asian Americans do not much care for blacks. Many blacks don't much care for blacks. And what exactly do, say, working class Latinos and gays who work in finance have in common? Not very much, right? There's almost nothing that unites the coalition of the fringe except a shared antipathy to the white Christian core of this country.
Now, Nuri Martinez is the child of Mexican immigrants, but she says this about immigrants from the Mexican state of Oaxaca. She calls them short, little, dark people.
Well, are those immigrants short? Yes. Are they dark? Yes. Short, dark, whatever. These are descriptors. Either they're true or they're false, right? So just making commonsensical observations is somehow, horrendous. And supposedly this quote-unquote indigenous community, right, of Oaxacans that live in Koreatown in Los Angeles, but they're called an indigenous community. They'd be indigenous if they were back in Oaxaca in Mexico. But if they have immigrated to America and they live in Koreatown in Los Angeles, they're no longer an indigenous community. So not all races, not all groups are equally tall or short, equally handsome, equally light. So making observations about reality is somehow shocking.
And she says of the Cuban American district attorney here in LA, she says, F that guy. He's with the blacks.
And either that's true or that's false, right? Is Los Angeles district attorney by and large siding with the black community as opposed to the white community? Yes, he is. So why is that so shocking to point out these commonsensical observations?
John?
All right, Nick Watt in Los Angeles. Nick, thank you so much for that. I want to discuss now John Avlon, CNN senior political analyst. Racist enough to resign the presidency, but not
racist enough. It's like unicorn enough, right? You're talking about a made-up moral category.
Racist enough to give up your whole council seat? Explain to me how tenable that is.
She's trying to walk the line. She's trying to say, look, I'm going to acknowledge it was wrong. which is more than some politicians do, take herself out of leadership, but try to hold on to this seat and hope that
she should never have apologized. Right? She should never have apologized. She didn't say anything that was worthy of an apology.
Luke Glen High, there were multiple protests today in downtown, including one outside of City Hall.
So why were there all these protests? Because they were incentivized. They were whipped up by the media. They were whipped up by activists. They were whipped up with people with empty lives who create and propagate these made-up moral categories such as racist.
During that council meeting, many say they wanted to go inside but couldn't due to capacity, so they marched through the streets calling loudly for their resignation.
This is what LA. So do you think most of these people have jobs or lives? I don't think so.
Large groups rallied outside of LA City Hall during the first council meeting since racist remarks from now resigned President Nuri Martinez were leaked.
We're saying no to hate. We're saying you don't represent us. We're also questioning all of the motives on all of the votes that you've done up to this point.
Right, so you can question people's motives all day long, and not even the people who possess the motives are going to have much insight into their own motives, right? Motives are difficult to untangle even for the people who are experiencing them. Such blabber and babble.
Some demonstrators blocked Main Street. Many tell me there was a mix of emotions, outrage, disappointment, but also...
All racists must resign, right? So everyone with negative views of outgroups must resign. Well, having negative views of outgroups is just inherent to human nature. By and large, nobody cares about outgroups, whether the outgroup is defined by race, by education, by social class, by religion. Right? What these people want to do is abolish being human.
So, a sense of pride.
I was happy, though, to see so many people from different backgrounds come out and protest against this. Get them out!
Community activists traveled from neighboring counties, concerned that what happens in LA will set the tone for what can happen elsewhere.
Yeah, community activists just so concerned, right? Here's an opportunity to go before TV cameras and denounce, right? So the left lives for occasions like this. The left lives to denounce racism and ignorance and bigotry, right? The right is motivated by reducing disorder and contagion. The left is always on the lookout for ignorance.
We're here in unity, and that's what we should be preaching to the youth of tomorrow.
Nuri Martinez said she's taking a leave of absence after she announced she's stepping down as council president, but people say that's not enough.
So Nuri Martinez was always accusing other people of being racist. And all the people who are pronouncing on how evil what these council members did, you know, how bad they are, how racist they are. Everyone has things that they say in private that would look horrific if they were made public.
Hell no. You will not stay on city council.
They want her out, along with council members Kevin De Leon and Gil Cedillo, who were also part of that meeting that was supposed to be about redistricting. Now,
so one of the deeper stories here is that Latinos are no longer a reliable member of the coalition of the Fringe. It wouldn't be surprising to find Latinos getting 35 to 40% of their votes to Republicans come this midterm.
People are calling for the state attorney general to investigate.
We are very concerned about the possibility that these council members and this labor leader were beyond racially insensitive, that they were seeking to disenfranchise the black vote in this city.
They have never been representing our communities. That's why we feel that it's very strongly that we need to start voting around values and not around identity politics.
Disenfranchise the black vote. So blacks are less than 9% in Los Angeles, all right? And yet they occupy about a third of the major city council seats. I mean, this idea of like disenfranchising, right? So blacks, they're less than 9% of the LA population. They have 20% of the city council seats. All right, they have far greater clout than would be suggested by their 8.8% of the population. So white Angelenos are about 28% of the city Asians are about 12%, and Latinos are about 55% of the citizens of Los Angeles.
The calls for resignation are loud and clear from various political leaders and community members, but one resident showed up to defend De Leon.
He said he was sorry. He should move on and learn from it.
Okay, Mickey Kyle says he's no longer a character voter. So I think this is important. This is the education of Mickey Kyle.
In helping Trump win the election, a large and illicit role. And by the way, the guy I mentioned in the regular podcast, Alperovitz, his group, CrowdStrike, I've heard that they're the only ones who actually gathered technical information indicating that the Russians were behind the DNC email hack, and that no government investigation ever did, or at least no government investigators ever did. And that's the one thing that I think was consequential. So if that wasn't done by the Russians, then I don't think they had much to do with anything. I think that email hack was consequential, but that's a tangent.
Those were the emails that where they conspired against Bernie Sanders.
Well, there's just a lot of shit. It was like a story a day. It was like an unflattering Hillary story having to do with the Clinton Foundation. It was a lot of, it was like they were legit. They were most of them, not all, were pretty legit stories. And if you recall, even though, the media is by and large pro-Hillary, they were so sure she was going to win that they were just having a field day with all the new leads they got from this email hack and all the embarrassing shit. And so there was a lot of negative publicity for Hillary that came out of this. And apparently, although I guess the Russians are still the most likely suspect, apparently that has not been established with the certainty that I once believed. Anyway, it's tangent. Yeah. One source of the progressive hawkism on foreign policy is specifically about Russia, and it has to do with them associating Russia with Donald Trump. And it's that simple. This is the way human psychology works. It's
about his client before the case was over.
Wait, this was Toobin's client?
Well, his client was whoever was in the United States government, whoever was Walsh's client. And he said things that undermined the case of whoever Walsh was representing. But all's fair in journalism if it brings out the truth. So that's fine. No, then he wrote this very bad book about Clinton, where he said that conveniently any interest in the sexual peccadillos of a candidate is just an attempt to sell magazines. And Mike Isikoff was just trying to sell books when he investigated it. And the character issue tells you nothing that you need to know about a politician. It's just all bullshit, especially the character issue as reflected in sex. So we shouldn't write about adultery or any of the things that Jeffrey Toobin, engage in.
We should have guessed what was coming down the line when he said that. Mickey, a big Toobination scandal.
Exactly. Anyway, but it's because he's flying my friend Isikoff. That was the point. It was also a shitty book because I was all hepped up on the Clinton's Monica Lewinsky scandal at the time, and he was basically saying it wasn't important. And I thought it was important. And in his book, he points out that, Bill Clinton should have killed off Hillary's healthcare initiative, but he was scared to because he had cheated on her so often. He thought this would really set her off. And that was sort of their implicit bargain. So it turns out the adultery was incredibly relevant to policy because they...
Right. So Bill Clinton didn't kill off Hillary Clinton's ridiculous healthcare initiative because he was so scared of Hillary due to all its philandering.
It prompted Clinton's biggest mistake in his first 2 years as president.
Mickey, can I ask you a question? Remind me, did the series of unflattering things you just said about Jeffrey Toobin begin with your denying that you have any antipathy toward him?
No. Then I had overwhelming jealousy of his...
So, I see. So where does the antipathy come from if not jealousy?
The antipathy came from he's flying my friend Isikoff and was very sleazy about it.
Okay. And that's all?
Basically, yeah. He's friends with most of my friends.
Like you never once saw him on CNN and
Kinsley was one of the first people to promote his writing.
Was he? Did he publish him? Where?
In the New Republic, yeah.
But back when he was a nobody?
When he was a lawyer. He was always destined for this, but if Kinsley hadn't published him, somebody else would have, but Kinsley did.
So that's a higher bar, really, than anywhere else he's ever been published. It is. It is.
Anyway, so that's... And I've since learned, He's the guy who, when you talk to him, he's always looking over your shoulder for the more important person he's going to ditch you for.
I've never met people like that.
They're very rare in Washington.
It was like, the aforementioned Ari Melber. I don't remember her name. I saw him at a party fuck it. Like, it's not a big deal, but years ago, maybe 5 years ago, it was a classic high, because he used to be on he was on Blind Heads a few times, and I had been on his show the only time ever for a remote hookup, like only a few months before that. And so he's like, hi. And it was just like immediately, here, talk to my friend. And I wish I could remember who he made a beeline for. He just made a beeline for like by far the highest status person at the party. It was like, there was a true celebrity there. And like, I'm like, dude,
yeah, well,
I like the friend you've got me talking to, kind of.
Well, Bob, I ran into him once and he
treated you like royalty. Mr. Cass, can I get you any coffee?
He didn't ditch me.
No, sir. You know what probably happened? Some people get you mixed up with Jeffrey Toobin, and he may have been one of those.
That's probably at the, anyway. A guy who didn't do that was Michael Tomasky. Turned out he's a nice guy.
He is a nice guy. I would love to make some amendments to his foreign policy, but he's a nice guy.
The real Washington movers and shakers, the reason we're very skilled, ditch you and make a beeline for the important person without you even noticing it.
Well, Melbourne was not nearly that smooth.
They happen to wind up talking to the important person, and you don't even know how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
It seems totally organic.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the character issue, I used back when I was writing for 20 years ago, more than that, 1984, I was covering the presidential campaign, and I was trying to figure out who to cover. As I was doing the classic journalist thing, I was covering the race and trying to figure out who I wanted, and I wanted to go to work for because I was, of course, not a neutral journalist, but I wanted to figure out who I wanted to root for. And is this the Gary Hart, Walter Mondale, John Glenn race? And I decided the guy I liked the best was Fritz Hollings.
Right.
And it wasn't because I liked his issues that much. He was a hawk on defense, which I wasn't, although he sort of was vindicated in retrospect. He thought if we put the missiles in Europe, Russia might collapse. And sure enough, it did.
You think it was because we put missiles in Europe?
No, but I think it helped that we held the line. He also was a debt fanatic. He was a deficit hawk, and I wasn't a deficit hawk.
So you hitched your wagon to his star, did you not?
I hitched my wagon to his star.
How did that work out?
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Uh,
He did okay. He got 8% in the New Hampshire primary and dropped out. But I thought he had a good character. I thought a new issue. The reason to be a character voter as opposed to an issues voter is because you don't really know what the issues of tomorrow are going to be, and you want somebody who, if a new issue comes along, you sort of trust their instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example would be the Ukraine crisis. Okay. It's entirely possible that.
So the character issue, and Mickey says the reason you should vote, the argument for voting on character rather than issues is that you don't know what issues are going to come along. So if you vote on character, then unexpected issues will come along, and the person with good character will make better decisions. But there's no such thing as better character, right? Character traits are domain specific. So someone who is honest with his wife may well be dishonest in business. Someone who is friendly and pleasant at synagogue may be, quite nasty when it comes to politics or business. There aren't any character traits that are just generalizable. Some people are outgoing in certain situations, and they're shy in other situations, right? Some people are honest in certain circumstances and dishonest in other circumstances. So the issue is not voting on issues over character. The issue is there's no such thing as moral character, because our character, our personality is shaped by the situations we find ourselves in. And there are plenty of situations that will have more effect on your personality than anything inherent to your personality. So just being in church or in synagogue or in some kind of awe-inspiring situation is going to have an effect on you that's greater than any inherent personality traits.
Biden will handle the Ukraine crisis really well, okay? And one would be right to maybe choose Biden over Trump on the grounds of character, because Biden, a new crisis, he would handle it better than his opponent, okay? That's the way I used to think, okay? That's why I held the Monica Lewinsky thing against Clinton, because I thought, well, he's his decision-making process is going to be fucked up because he's in hock to his wife and he's a liar about sex, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of obviously went out with the window with Trump, who was a person of obvious bad character. And I guess thinking about it, why has that happened? Why am I no longer a character voter? And a lot of people are no longer character voters, including the voters who may elect Herschel Walker, senator from Georgia. It's because we think we know what the issues are now.
Mm-hmm.
And not only do we think we know what the issues are now, we think the issues are all important. So we can't really even conceive of another issue more important than, say, immigration that's going to come along, where we want somebody, even though we didn't see it, we sort of trust their instant judgment. And I think people on the left feel that they can't conceive of an issue more important than autocracy and the future of democracy that will come along. So, if somebody is a bad character, they don't care as long as they're on the right side of this.
Okay, the chat says, Bawdy, you need a steel door that marauders will not be able to axe through. You know what's the most effective steel door you can have? Friends, community, right? The best way to hedge against inflation, friends, community. The best way to make money, have friends, community. The best way to be happy and productive is to have friends and community. The best way to reduce your chances of having some kind of disabling addiction or compulsion, have friends and community. Right? The best thing you can do for your life, for most people, is to have friends and community. Right? Community, friends, you know, those tight bonds with other people, tight bonds with your own family. Those are the best steel doors that you can make for your life to protect yourself to the best extent possible against life's exigencies. You just never know what's coming down the pike. A 9.0 earthquake could roll through right now. And the best thing that you can do to survive an earthquake is to know your neighbors, is to be on friendly terms with your neighbors, to have friends and community, preferably within walking distance of you, right? The strength that you get from being part of a community, from contributing to a community, seeing people who are glad to see you, the warmth that you get from your Rebbe's smile or from the smile of your friends and community, that embrace, that connection, that working in synchronicity towards common goals, that sense of identity, that is the best defense there is. When you can create a common reality with other people, right? Just marching in tune, in unison with other people, provides a tremendous sense of strength and bonding and courage and energy, right? Anything that you do that gets on the same page with other people and creates a shared reality with other people creates energy, and it creates a morality, it creates an ethic, it creates an identity, and many of your problems in life are substantially diminished when you have friends and community. So that's the best steel door that you can possibly find.